And there she's giving another book review. She told me, these are just examples of various book reviews. She gave a lot of book reviews. I think she really enjoyed speaking. She loved to talk, and she was very self-aware, very composed person. She told me, I'm from DeRidder, Louisiana, which is 135 miles south of here. And she told me one time that she gave a couple of book reviews in DeRidder at different times. And I thought, well, that would have been a 3-hour drive on 171 in one way. You know, that was quite a jaunt. She also told me an anecdote of giving a review of a biography of Napoleon. And after the talk, a woman came up to her, and I guess because Cleo was very spirited, and I can imagine in her younger days, especially when she was talking, she would get very animated. So the woman came up to her and said, "Mrs. Barnwell, I thought you were Napoleon." Cleo laughed. She was involved in all sorts of horticultural things. She see that there's a mention where she's giving I'm not sure what that is, a nature trail. I think it's a talk at the tea hour at the Women's Department Club. That was in 1968. And then there's a mention in another article of some of her friends who were visiting from out of town and about their horticultural interests. And one of those women was also a friend of Caroline Dorman's, who was also very active in the creation of the nature preserve at Briarwood. There's another mention of the Delphi Study Club helping to beautify the grounds at LSUS, and that was 1968. So I assume that was fairly recent after the university was started there. I think it started in 67, if I'm not mistaken. Another lecture she gave at the Garden Forum at Aiken's Nursery, and that was in 1968 as well. And she gave an illustrated lecture which used slides of wildflowers that she had taken herself. And the article says the title was Nature Trails in Louisiana. And the slides for the lecture were taken by Mrs. Barnwell, whose work has received national recognition. And then it mentions in the next article the same thing, saying she was a board member of the Beautification Foundation and the Rose Society. She told me that she first got interested in wildflowers by photographing them, and she was very interested in violets. She had a collection, I think, of, dozens of different native violets. The Barnwell Center that was built, I guess the late 60s, early 70s, downtown. The R.S. Sim Barnwell family put up $500,000 and the city put up the rest of the funding for it. Sim Barnwell was a cousin to Cleo's husband. So Cleo, being the person she was involved in gardening, she was asked to be involved in planning. So I don't think the conservatory is there anymore, is it? It's gone. So there's a picture of the conservatory. And from what she said to me over the years that I knew her, she was very adamant in her view of gardening education, of horticulture education in the community. And that's one reason the conservatory was there. I throw this in for levity. There arose at the Barnwell, I don't know what, we'll see what year it was. but there was sort of a conflict between the two main groups that use the Barnwell Center, and that is the artist groups and the flower garden people. And I found an article in the newspaper, and the title of the article was actually, it said Tempest in a Hot House about the article. And it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but the article mentions that there was a conflict over the use of the auditorium between the two groups. And also I read in another article that there was some irritation on the part of one group that the other group's activities detracted from their activities when they were simultaneous. And the article mentions Jean Sarter, and I don't know if any of you knew Jean Sarter, but she was also a formidable woman. She was a good friend of my late mother-in-law's, who was also an artist involved in that artist group. And when I mentioned Jean Sarter to Cleo rolled her eyes and said, "Jean Sarter, she and I went round and round." And she told me about the disagreement over the use. And she went on to explain to me why she was correct in her belief about Barnwell. So I mentioned her interest in photographing wildflowers was how she began to be involved with native plants. She did meet Caroline Dorman late in Caroline's life. I don't know exactly when. Caroline died in 1971, and Cleo was involved with the, actually on Caroline's deathbed, I believe she signed the papers to create a trust for Briarwood Nature Preserve. And Cleo was involved in the creation of the preserve. She was on the board of directors for a number of trustees for a number of years. And there's a famous photograph of Caroline on the left with the grandpappy pine. I think they must have been, I never knew Caroline Dorman, of course, but I think they must have been very much soul sisters. They were very different people. Cleo I think Cleo was a very pragmatic person, and she would see a problem and she would think of a resolution to it and not at all be timid about pursuing that resolution. She said one time to me about Caroline that Caroline was an artist, of course, and she was involved in gardening her woodland home below Saline. And Cleo said one time to me that Caroline would have starved to death had it not been for people like Edith Stern and Cami Henry. Edith Stern was a New Orleans woman, heir of Sears Roebuck fortune, and Cami Henry, of course, was proprietress at Melrose Plantation. And they were mentors to Caroline and helped support her by purchasing advance copies of the books she wrote. And Cleo also told me another funny story about Caroline. That one time, a well-to-do woman from Arkansas had come to visit and stay overnight with Caroline, and it was in the wintertime and it snowed, and they didn't have an indoor bathroom, they had an outhouse. And the next morning when the woman left, she wrote a check to Caroline and she said, "Now the next time I come here, I want you to have an indoor bathroom." So this is an article about the formation of the Briarwood Horticultural Society. This is in a 1980 newspaper article. And today there exists Friends of Briarwood, which is a support group that you can join and pay dues, and they have activities during the year. And I don't know if this preceded that or not. I didn't mention in the previous slide, I had a photograph, and failed to mention Richard and Jessie Johnson, who were the curators at Briarwood when it was formed. And actually, they lived there on the property and were the curators for 40 some odd years with no pay. And then they retired a number of years ago, and their son and his wife became curator, and now they're gone, and they have a very young woman there, who is now the curator.
Is that a state-funded property?
Oh, no,
Oh, it's
no,
not?
it's private. It's a
Okay. I
private
know it's
trust.
state-funded.
You can join the Friends,
Okay.
and then they have a fundraiser, picnic in spring.
Long trails to go.
Yeah, it's a marvelous place. You know, it was hit by a tornado, gosh, I don't know, 5 years ago maybe.
Lots of trees.
And I went down there to help, and it was, I just started crying. It was just a huge huge tree fell on top of Carolyn's log house. It was just,
And then it burned after that, didn't
I didn't know.
it? It burned and they refurbished it.
It was devastating. It was like just that little spot. This tornado touched down and it looked like a bomb had gone. There were trees just splintered.